Hey guys, welcome to the Credence Apex Show, episode 10. And for today, we have to my right Cole Cook. So, a little bit about the backstory. So, Cole and I have been working together for about 18 months now. So, you're not the first client I've worked with, but in terms of number of hours, we probably spent more time than any of my clients. And even since the first day to now, and kind of why I want to bring you onto the show is just your mobility, flexibility, and just it's very hard to get you sore. Like I've tried all sorts of ways. Like I beat you down in every way imaginable, and the next day you come back, it's like, oh, how are you feeling? So, whatever.
Well, it sure is transformation first.
Yeah.
Because
It's
you were
huge,
quite
right?
a bit bigger when we first met.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate?
Yeah, so I was probably a good 40 to 50 pounds heavier than I am currently.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that was, a mix of finishing up grad school, the pandemic, living at home, starting a new job. All of that
So-
rolls into,
Just a bunch of excuses.
right, pretty much. Pretty much. A whole lot of reasons for me to not do what I should have been doing. And so I just needed a change and ended up stumbling upon an ad on Facebook and then, started working with Tony and
Okay, so you guys are doing one-on-one. You're still doing one-on-one.
Did you connect through Dave or did you connect through Tony?
It would have been through me, but yeah, I mean,
Life. Mhm.
what made you decide to go the personal training route?
so I tend to be fairly introverted and I don't really like big groups. So being one-on-one is a little better for me personally.
Yeah.
And then also just allowing a little more focus on what I want rather than, sort of the group setting.
Right.
I part of my background in is actually as a group fitness instructor. So I've taught group fitness classes before,
Okay.
and I know that there are pros and cons to those.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of wanted that one-on-one, and again being a little more introverted, and given that my job is a lot more, I can go for a while without actually talking to other people.
What is your job?
So I'm a principal data science analyst.
Specifically, that means.
Yeah, what is that?
It means that I play with numbers and data a lot, and I basically sit behind a computer all day.
Okay. And you're at Mayo?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And not that like we don't interact on our team, but we don't necessarily have to interact because it can be very isolated and insular. So another part of that one-on-one was having that dedicated, like, hey, I'm going to actually talk to a human face to face rather than just calling home or
Right.
all that. So yeah,
Okay, so you lost what, like about 50
somewhere
pounds?
there.
Working with Tony?
Yep.
It's amazing, Tony.
Did you change your diet?
Yeah. More so just trying to make sure to, be eating a little more reasonably, and or paying more attention because
What were you
Right.
doing? What did you
whatever whatever I could grab, basically, especially towards
What would you say the biggest change was for your diet?
current struggle still, but probably when that happened was eating more protein.
Okay.
And probably reducing like refined carbs.
So generally what I'll tell people is increase protein because although you see
Why is it terrible?
It's hard for me to do. It's not something
Okay.
that like I'm not a natural
I've
meat
seen
eater.
like where people say that the American diet is too high in protein, but I think that that's wrong.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
my-
especially for women, but we're not
Oh,
talking
for
about
sure for women. Well, and men too, right?
Right.
Because I think it's too high in refined sugars, right?
Right.
Also, we don't drink enough water.
Yep. Nope.
And so protein and water, if we can fix those two things, generally I see weight loss like almost immediately. So That's what you did. You lost about 50 pounds.
Yep.
How do you feel?
I mean, much better, and I'm back to sort of where I was prior to the whole finishing up grad school and all that. So that's helpful, right? Definitely helps from a mindset standpoint, right? If you are back to sort of partially where you were, maybe not fully where you were, but that, mindset of like, well, I used to be able to do this and that was only a year ago,
Right.
can be a little crushing sometimes. But
Yeah, and even like mentally, like the changes are even more drastic because before, like a push up or like even jumping 24 inches, that gives you some trepidation. Now I'm making you go flip upside down. Trey's giving the Navy SEALs giving you like all kinds of weird workouts and you just do it. So yeah, that mindset shift I think is even more profound than
Yeah.
the
And I've
physical
seen
ones.
you at some of the group classes at CrossFit. So just stepping out of your comfort zone and doing things like that. Is that on purpose?
sometimes, yeah. And sometimes it's just I'm bored and I'm gonna do something different. But yeah, some of it
Working out
I'm-
is not a bad thing to do when
no,
you're bored.
no, it's not.
Like,
It's not.
Right.
right?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's not.
Yeah, I mean,
but-
there's way worse things you could do when you're bored.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Well, congrats on your weight loss journey. That's huge, dude. A lot of people don't do it, and a lot of people are scared to do it. So, like, what would you say to somebody that's afraid to do it, or like at the same place you are, like, I'm maybe too out of shape to do this?
I mean, I would just say try to find something that works for you. And I mean, it's the same with basically any area of life, right? There's always something that likely could work, and take it small. I don't always like to do that, but the more bite size that you can do it and make it sustainable in the
Did
long
you
run.
start smaller? Did you? 'Cause
I'm-
how many days? You're 3 days a week
Yeah.
with Tony.
Yeah. So
Okay.
when we started, I think it was 1 or 2, maybe 2.
Yep, it was two
But-
30-minute
yeah,
sessions.
30 minutes, yeah.
We went to
Oh,
three
wow.
30-minute
So
sessions.
you started just with 2 30-minute sessions a week.
and what are
Okay.
you at now?
Three
3
1-hour
hour
sessions.
sessions.
Plus additional work on the off days.
Wow.
Dang. And I've seen you come in and do like all the additional work when I'm working with my other clients. So you're impressive.
How long did it take you to move from 2 30-minute sessions to like 3 30-minute sessions?
I honestly have no idea what that was.
It
You
was-
probably have a better
It was about
option.
90 days.
Yeah, okay, that seems...
Okay. And then how long did it take him to go from 3 30-minute sessions to 3 1-hour sessions?
It's another 90 days. So basically 90 days are like the sweet spot where you get into a routine for a while and then you kind of master your craft at that stage and then you take it to the next level.
And then I think around then also was when I had a big project that was about to hit that I knew about.
At work?
And I just knew that I needed something to be like, if I'm paying, it's going to happen. Otherwise, I'm
Yeah.
not going to do it. So,
Yeah, and it paid off for you big time too because now
Yeah.
you're I mean, even back then you were like crazy flexible and then your body just recovers in a way that astounds me.
So, Cole, personal training's pretty expensive. What would you say to someone that can't afford that? Which, I mean, a lot of people can't.
right.
And that's fine. So, like, there's other routes to go. So what would you say to that?
I mean, like I said, I used to teach group fitness classes. So those are great places to start, right? If you can afford that, there's tons of great things on YouTube. If you want to watch some video and follow along, or even just going out for walks more so, especially again, coming from someone who sits behind a computer basically 24/7.
Right.
And like, if I'm working remotely, if I get even 1,000 steps in, that's a lot of steps for me. Like that's right. No, and I'm not saying it's healthy. I'm just saying
bathroom desk.
right,
bathroom
right.
desk.
That's about it.
Mhm.
So, yeah, if you can get up and go.
So for someone
For a
like
walk.
you, exercise is vital.
Yeah. And
Otherwise, you don't do anything.
I don't have to, right? Because I like it. And especially, depending on the culture of the job, right? Sometimes it's very much like you just need to focus and get it done, and everyone is expected to be at your desk during that window.
Yeah.
That like 9 to 5 or whatever
Yeah.
it is. And so then, there's also there's just no reason to go. And then also as from sort of my grad school days, there was a lot of that, just like you just focus and you just stare intently at the screen, right? And that's all that you do for months at a time. But so
Okay. Well, congrats on that. Let's go
Grad school's
ahead and
done,
move,
right?
Let's
Yeah.
go ahead and move
Okay.
into what we were actually
Okay.
going to talk about for the podcast.
I think you got 3
Sorry
people
about
who are
that.
like,
Hey, I mean, I did kind of warn you we tend to go off script.
That's
and
okay.
it goes
Oh, yeah.
back, so.
I go very off script when I talk, so
Good.
Perfect. So let's move on to the topic of today, which is yoga and meditation. They're not things that we typically think of, and before meeting you, I was like, yoga meditation, that sounds lame. And but having seen
he probably did.
like all the things that you're able to do, both in terms of recovery and mobility, and it got me genuinely curious. And you know this, we talked about this, but so I guess to kind of start, the perfect question is, what are some common misconceptions about yoga and meditation? What are some backgrounds? What are your backgrounds, and how would that affect someone like me? Because I have those same misconceptions.
So, as I said, I was a group fitness instructor. So I taught yoga and Pilates for about 5 years in grad school.
Okay. So the group fitness was yoga, Pilates.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and we had to do about 50-50 for most of the styles that we ended up teaching. So, there's a lot of yoga and Pilates end up being kind of similar, right? There's a strong focus on the breath and then quality of movement, even though it can be kind of tricky to combine those two, just because Pilates, at least what we were doing, was a lot more mat focused, right? So you're supine, and then yoga is a lot more, standing posture. So you want to minimize that transition because it's kind of awkward.
Okay.
But anyways, so let's pull back a little bit. Like I said, taught yoga and Pilates for about 5 years. After doing that, ended up getting a 200-hour or going through a 200-hour yoga teacher training. Have also done a 200-hour meditation teacher training. And so that's sort of my background prior. So it would have been about sophomore year of high school that I started doing yoga, and I've kind of been doing it off
What
and
is
on.
meditation?
Well, so yeah, I was going to say we'll get to yoga.
Okay.
What is yoga and meditation?
You keep rolling.
Yeah, no. So that was what I was going to say before getting into misconceptions, is what these things actually are. So yoga, the typical definition is to yoke, right? So the idea, so yoga comes from a Sanskrit word, which is a language over in India, an old language that basically no one speaks at this point. But it means to yoke. And so the idea is, at least how we tend to think about it in the West, is sort of yoking the mind and body, right? So if you think about a typical yoga class, and this is just one aspect of yoga, the physical posture element, the asana type of yoga that we tend to see in the West, there's, again, that strong focus on movement and breath and connecting those two.
Okay.
And so in doing so, because the mind and the breath can be so intimately connected, sort of through the central nervous system, and how you can manipulate, either your parasympathetic or sympathetic response with the breath, and then with movement, you can kind of allow yourself to, get more in tuned in the body, and again, sort of yoking all of this, combining things. So, when you think about to yoke, think of like yoking a horse to a carriage.
Yep.
Right. That sort of
Connecting.
idea. Yeah.
Okay.
So then meditation is the definition that I like most is sort of to become familiar with. And the reason why I like that is it's very all encompassing, right? So a very traditional meditation practice would be to just sit and focus on your breath, right? So you inhale and you exhale. Maybe you're mentally labeling inhale, exhale. Maybe you're counting the breath. Maybe you're combining a mantra with the breath. So maybe you're saying, on the inhale, you're saying something about, I don't know, I receive love, and on the exhale, I give love, something like that, right? So either way, in that case, you're becoming more familiar with the breath, those qualities of the breath. And so that's how sort of yoga and meditation can also be connected, because yoga can sort of be thought of as a moving meditation, because again, you're becoming more familiar with the body, you're becoming more familiar with the breath. So both of them, can kind of have somewhat spiritual linkage, but they can also be done very, at least meditation often, can be done in a very secular, non-spiritual, religious way. But when it comes to some sort of misconceptions about yoga, I've kind of tiptoed around one of them, and that is this idea that yoga is asana, or that physical posture practice that we see. That's just one small element of yoga.
Okay.
So if you follow, if you believe the path that is laid out in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which is a text that, traces back, I don't know, a very long time ago, and is kind of more in one of those, similar to, like Homer's Odyssey, where it's like, is Homer an actual person, or is it just,
A book.
right, some collection of an oral tradition that someone eventually wrote down, and it was attributed to someone.
Okay.
So same sort of thing with Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, but his sutras have kind of an eightfold path, one of which is asana. Just one of them is that physical posture.
And that's the one we're most common.
We're most common with, right? Because that's what you see. That's what people think of when you say yoga is, let's go take a yoga class.
Yeah.
But it also includes various like things that you shouldn't do. So one of the things that you shouldn't do is not harming, which is why a lot of yogis tend to be vegetarians or vegans, because they take that to mean, if I kill an animal, that's harming the animal, so I shouldn't eat that. Okay. But there are other individuals who have actually been told that that's actually harming themselves, because maybe they're not getting enough protein, right? So you kind of have to weigh this balance of, where are my own ethics with respect to this idea of non-harming? Another thing for the things that you should do are things like cleanliness. And so, that might be bodily cleanliness, that might mean spatial cleanliness, that might mean mental cleanliness, all of these sorts of things. And, again, it's like an eightfold path. And depending on your underlying tradition, you may sort of step through linearly, or you may kind of pick and choose.
Okay.
With asana, that tends to be sort of the third rung. So, often we're ignoring the kind of ethical elements.
With asana?
Yeah, so the asana, again, is like the third rung. So if you're going the linear path, you're kind of ignoring the ethical, like, this is what you should and shouldn't do by jumping into asana.
You're just going for the physical.
Right. Granted, there are still benefits to that, obviously. But that's sort of probably one of the biggest misconceptions that I see. And then a big misconception about both of them is just that, again, these are like very all-encompassing words, right? So if I went and the styling that I typically would do for yoga is very different than, say, I don't know, a styling that my mom would do, more than likely. And the styling that I started teaching with is very different than where I ended teaching with and what I would typically practice now. Because yoga can be very physical, right? It can be like a hot yoga class or a power yoga class where it's movement. And you're going through really intense postures, right? Even thinking about like handstands and, all of these crazy arm balances.
You're looking at me.
What do you do now?
I tend to, if I practice, I'm kind of more in like a vinyasa or sort of yin or restorative. So vinyasa is that very much kind of almost dancey quality where it's very much movement and breath combined. And
You
so
go
that,
from one movement into the other using your breath to
right.
transition.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So that typical like sun salute sort of idea where it's inhale, arms up overhead, exhale, fold, continuing through down dog, push-ups, all these sorts of things.
Yeah.
So that would be kind of where I classically start and what I enjoy, but then I also get into some of the more like yin and restorative. So restorative would be a lot more prop focused. So it might be, like using a really supportive pillow behind your back and laying open and just allowing the chest to open up. Or yin is going to be something more like, if you're sitting, laying in pigeon, you might hold pigeon for 5 minutes. So those have very different, sort of underlying physiological responses as well as mental responses.
Yeah.
Because when you're moving from pose and you're using your breath to do that, you can connect to your body.
What's the benefit of holding a pigeon in a 5-minute?
So some people say that it starts to help, and this is
Artistic.
Yeah. So it starts to help get into like ligaments and connective tissue and that sort of stuff, and also might help a little bit, maybe not. I think there's better techniques for that, but maybe getting into the like fascial system because you're
the release.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's so for me. I find because I tend to be super flexible and like honestly sitting in pigeon for 5 minutes, I do it while I work. If I'm home, I'll just set my laptop in front of me and get into pigeon. And set a timer so that I don't get uneven between side to side. But for me, I find, especially for individuals who like jump into the yin space, it's the mental aspect. Holding pigeon that first few times for like 5 minutes or even 3 minutes or a minute, you're going to start going to places and you're going to be like, this sucks, But you eventually just have to breathe through it, and you have to realize that you don't go as deep as you typically would in a yoga class where you're going to hold it for like 20 seconds.
Right.
Otherwise, you will be in pain and you probably are injuring yourself.
And as a newcomer, I can speak to this because once I was in a pigeon pose, and I don't know if you kept time, but it wasn't 5 minutes.
It was not 5 minutes. Not 5 minutes.
Yeah, I tapped out.
So
Did you mentally gave up or what?
No, I thought it felt like 5 minutes. I stood up. It's like, oh shoot, it's actually not 5 minutes.
Okay. Sorry, Dave.
So some newer people to fitness or like getting back into it, they have problems like even getting into the poses. So is there like scaling?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, so take pigeon for instance. One thing, if you're looking at a picture of pigeon, right, more than likely. So pigeon, for those who may not fully know, you're going to be, typically it's going to be easiest to sort of start in a plank, and then pull one knee in towards your wrists. So say we're going with right leg forward. So then, our right knee might be towards our right wrist, right foot towards our left wrist. And then we're going to slowly allow our hips to kind of sink down towards the mat. You can think about staying with a lifted spine. You can think about folding forward, which is going to increase the stretch along the hip. So that's one way to sort of modulate the intensity. Another is that you can place, say, a block or a bolster under your hips, which would help so that you feel a little more supported and you're not stretching as much. Another is to sort of take it on your back, right? So you can think about taking like figure four, where you cross your knee. So you be on your back, and then again, if we're on the right side, we take our right foot, cross it over our left knee, and then just pull the left knee towards the chest slowly. Yeah. So that's sort of a way to modify. I think, so in that case, we're getting a similar stretch, into the glute and the psoas, or not psoas, whatever it is. I can't think of
That's
it.
fine.
But yeah, I used to say it all the time. But anyways, so you're getting a similar stretch, but it's a very different shape, right? At least like it on the outside, it looks very different. So there are tons of ways to do it, and depending on the pose, I definitely would say, and this is something that I think a lot of people notice as an evolution. I certainly did. When I started, I never wanted to use props. Never. You muscle into it. You're like, I can stretch into this. I'll be fine. But eventually you notice that, like, yeah, you can still muscle into it, but sometimes it just feels really nice to have a prop and have a block that supports you, brings the ground up so that you don't have to bend over as much, or, again, you just have that felt sense of support.
Yeah.
So there are tons of props that you can use, blocks, straps, even a wall, that can help you assist into that. But it's also, as with any sort of physical endeavor, it's always that never going to pain, going to sensation, maybe flirting with that edge, but never going to that other side.
So what would you say are like physiological benefits of starting a yoga practice or continuing over the long term?
Yeah, so I think, obviously, that you do have to be a little careful about it. You can increase range of motion, but that can come with risks, right? So I personally have popped my hamstring audibly because I was showing off doing the splits, pushed when I should have stayed high, and it was a real loud pop and it burned. So, and it's still something I struggle with to this day. And so, that's something that you do have to be careful with, right? When it comes to, any physical endeavor, but, with yoga, right? You can easily push when you shouldn't because you think your muscles are stretchy enough and it's not going to happen. And so that's where, maybe working more into that like mobility side of things where you're actually trying to actively use that range rather than just allowing yourself to collapse into that end range. So depending, again, on how you practice yoga, you might be getting a little more of that mobility benefit, or maybe you're just getting that underlying stretch response. Again, because you're connecting movement with breath, and or you're just focusing more on the breath. I think for a lot of people, you start to fall more into that parasympathetic response. So you're reducing stress, and that, can help carry over and have long-lasting benefits that aren't just that hour or however long you spend on the mat. Because maybe, you take a moment, you find yourself being really stressed and you just take a moment to come back to the breath. And so there's, that benefit that may not be that your underlying CNS response is more parasympathetic, but just that you've got that practice and that, that memory of, oh yeah, I can touch this little thing and I can come back to a more appropriate response. And then again, if you're depending on the styling, if you're doing something more vigorous, you might be getting a little bit of cardiovascular benefit, maybe, depending on, again, how vigorous. And then you could also say, maybe if you're doing hot yoga, you also might be getting it, but
you'd be burning some more calories for sure. So
right. But then you also have the additional issue that now your muscles are a little more warm, and that can lead to overstretch injuries. So, and or dehydration, right? If you're in a hot room for an hour and you're not used to it.
Pass out. But no big deal.
So that's why drinking a gallon of water helps with.
I guess, yeah.
How important would you say flexibility is to overall fitness?
Oh boy. Again, it can be a double-edged sword, right? And I think that again is where the mobility is a much better focus than underlying flexibility. But I personally love being super flexible, and I do think, it helps from the standpoint that I can much more easily get into different postures and I'm not just saying, yoga postures. I'm saying, even lifting or whatever. It makes it easier for certain things.
I was going to ask how it impacted your lifting specifically, or what you've noticed as you've improved.
I don't fully know, because I feel like some of it,
So for most people,
uh-huh.
they're not flexible enough.
Right. Oh yeah.
Like they can't get deep enough in a squat, or
That, or like they can't like push
reach
overhead.
overhead.
Yeah, like most people can't.
Right.
So I think that like being over flexible, yes, like that's a bad thing.
Yes.
It goes both ways.
Yes, it does.
But most people aren't over flexible.
Right. Yeah, no, and I mean, I know that, like, again, I've been doing yoga off and on since like sophomore year of high school, and I'm in my 30s, so it's been a while, and I also predominantly, that was my, either that or like cardio was always sort of my focus. So I historically have, and I also just sort of historically have been a flexible individual, right? Like I've just been naturally flexible.
Okay.
So I, it's harder for me to see that, but I do know that, when I am tighter, I can tell that, movement is a little restricted for me. Like even just doing, like pass-throughs or whatever, some days that's just not fun, even for someone who like is super flexible.
Yeah, I'm a super flexible person, and I've actually been worked up for Marfan's because of my height, which for those of you that aren't related to that, it's a conjunctive disease. And I don't have it, but because of that, like things happen, and I can go in things that are positions that are generally not seen in a woman my age because of that position. So it's one of those things where it does cause more injuries too, because you just naturally go there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's, you don't really realize that you're in a maybe compromised position.
Right.
Until you're there.
Yeah.
Yep. But yeah, I think overall, I think flexibility is important, but going, is holding pigeon for 5 minutes important? Probably not.
So now let's shift focus a little bit then to breath work. So something I've noticed in a lot of clients is when they exercise, they forget to do the inhale part. Like they're constantly breathing out, and then they're gasping for air. They feel nauseous and dizzy, and we talked about this. It's because they're not developing balanced breaths, right? Like they don't have an equal balance of inhales and exhales. So, what do you have to say about that?
I mean,
or recommendations.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Personally, for me, I think some of it, and this may or may not work depending on what you're doing, is going to be slowing down in a way, right? So that you can kind of focus on that inhale, on that exhale. And some of it also might just be learning when to inhale and exhale, right? So
you've been breathing all your life, but you're doing it wrong.
Right. Well, and that's also true. Because how many people are breathing in and out through their mouth? That is less than ideal, right? And
why is that less than ideal?
So with the nose, right, that's going to help condition the breath, or the breath. So and the air that's flowing in. So that means it's changing the temperature to a more appropriate temperature. It's going to be filtering the air that we breathe. And that doesn't really happen when you breathe through the mouth.
Okay.
So, and there are also some other things that apparently happen. And a lot of people, feel free to do your own research into this, but some people, talk about how like nasal or mouth breathers tend to have more sleep apnea and things like that. And it's, again, because you're breathing incorrectly. And there are also like tribes that basically will like tape or, try and cover children's mouths as they sleep so that they just always breathe nasally. But I think, there are many other reasons, I'm sure, but those are kind of the main things. But to sort of, more about like just underlying breath, I think that we also, as to Abby's point, right, that we've been breathing our entire lives. So we kind of forget that it actually matters, and or we don't know that it matters. Because how many people that aren't in the fitness space know how you can control your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system?
And I think that as a nurse, you don't realize it either until you've hit a point where people can't breathe, right? So then that fear of not being able to breathe, or that like restricted breathing, makes them realize that, yes, I do have control over this, but so much of it is just natural. And like,
because you don't think about breathing.
No, you don't, until you have to.
Right. Yeah. But the breath is super powerful. And I've noticed, like, we were doing, I don't know what it was, a while ago, but, like slam balls, like rainbow slam ball sort of thing. And when I wasn't focusing on my breath, I noticed how much more tired I was getting. But then when I started focusing on my breath and just being very, deliberate about my inhales and exhales, and again, because I have that yoga background of like very much connecting movement and breath, everything was much fine. Like it was just fine. And I was like, I could do this for days.
But that's probably why
He's still doing it.
the same workout that all my clients end up on the floor gasping for breath. You're like just cranking it out. It's like, this is easy. Give me something harder. So breath work is the secret to basically becoming a more fit human being.
I think
part of it at least.
I think there's there are definite benefits to it. And again, but even there are, you can go down, and I personally haven't done enough research into this, but trying to say run or bike, always keeping that nasal breath, right?
Yeah.
But who wants to run at that pace to an extent, right? Like if you're running 8 miles, I don't want to take it, 14-minute mile or whatever.
Yeah.
Let's just get it done.
It doesn't stay at a 14-minute mile though, right? I mean, like if you teach yourself to breathe nasally, eventually you will increase your miles.
Right.
Because you only are breathing through your nose.
You should, yeah.
Right?
Right.
It's just a matter of training yourself, and most people don't take the time to train themselves how to breathe.
Yeah. Oh, and I have tons of training on how to breathe, and I can breathe when I'm doing yoga, but when I start running, I'm like in and out through the mouth. Let's just go.
Yeah, right.
So things don't always transfer, but.
So we have about 5 more minutes. We're gonna start wrapping things up.
What are so let's say you're an owner of a yoga studio. I walk in, it's like, all right, I want to get better over the next year. What are some steps you would recommend?
Better how?
Like I want to start a yoga practice. Give me a roadmap from day 1 to day 365.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would start small, right? So that means, even if that's, you can only attend a class per week or once a month, great. If that means that, you attend class 1 week and then you take, a couple elements from it, maybe you take a sun salute from it and you do that every morning, just a single sun salute, right? So just one small movement. That over time is going to help build. And again, like if it's looking more for that mobility or flexibility, then maybe it is having to increase duration and actually doing the same movements over and over. Or if it's getting more into that stress response, maybe it is just focusing on your breath.
Okay.
And setting a timer, right? And doing it for 5 minutes, maybe even a minute. Honestly, like you would be amazed at the changes, especially if you've been practiced, that you can get in like a minute or less just by focusing on your breath, right? But I think, again, in my opinion, it's sort of start small, try and make it something that you can, continue with. And again, if that's going, just for a class, or find something on YouTube.
So there's really no bare minimum. Like just anything helps is what you're kind of going with. Okay.
At least in my opinion, I do think that yes, sustained effort is better. And that's where if you can find like 5 minutes out of your day to practice every day, that probably is better than here's an hour long yoga class this month. 2 months later, I'll take an hour long yoga class.
Kind of like working out, right?
Well, yeah.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
Exactly.
But I also know that sometimes it's hard depending on your life and your priorities. Maybe it's not as prioritized as you thought. So that also is coming, is that what you actually want to do? But I do think that you can find tons online. And yeah, there are tons of ways that you can take it in small doses or just go crazy and have fun. Do it every day for hours.
There you go.
Awesome. So any final thoughts you would like to share with the listeners as we conclude this episode?
I guess one thing, if you fall asleep in yoga or meditation, it's totally cool. It happens. It totally happens. And I have stories. Yeah. I was once teaching and someone fell asleep, at the end of class. And I was trying my best to just, let it be, doesn't matter. At the end of the day, they fell asleep. That's fine. I personally don't care. They got relaxed. Great. That's what I want. But I was mic'd and forgot to turn my mic off before I took the battery out because we each had personal batteries. Super loud static. Woke the poor guy up. I just felt so bad because, it's not like a small little thing, right? It's just this like, boom. It's like, that was so not my intention, sir. I did not mean to startle you awake. But yeah, again, even in meditating, if you fall asleep, that's fine. That just means that you got relaxed enough and your body was like, I need sleep. You're not giving me enough. And so if that is an issue for you, either try to get more sleep or if you have an issue falling asleep and meditating, like you just don't want to do that, change your position.
Okay.
Because for me, I can fall asleep meditating if I lay down. If I sit up, it's not going to happen.
Is it the one time you came to the gym and that
Yep.
goal was dead?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
It's like cool.
Yep. I was lying in Shavasana on the floor.
Were you awake?
Yeah.
Just calm.
Yeah. I was just
Okay.
basically laying there meditating, and Dave came in, and I didn't move, and you did whatever, and I didn't move, and
Thought he was dead.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in. This concludes our episode. Hope you learned a thing or two about yoga and meditation. And if you like what you're seeing, like, subscribe. We'll be posting content once a week.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Cole. That was wonderful.
Yeah, thanks, Cole.
Yeah.
That's good, dude. Allie's here.
Sounds good.